Welcome to Marketing 247, Consumer Behavior, offered by Harper College Online. My name is Dr. George Mochocki. So what do we have today? Today we're going to be covering, let's see, we're starting week 7. Week 8. We'll be covering chapter 15 and chapter 16. So we click in there, and for this week, real quick overview. What we have, chapter 15 is going to be on searching. How do consumers or how do you search? Look how you search for information. And chapter 16 is just an extension from a previous chapter that we had on alternative evaluation and selection, how consumers evaluate and select. Different approach building on that. Okay, so this week you're going to have one quiz, again, covering chapter 15 and 16, 30 points like last week. The first 10 questions, 1.5 points, 10 questions for the chapters, 15, and then 5 questions, essay questions, short essay questions for chapter 16, each worth 3 points, okay? And you will have to, this week, you're going to do a form. Now, the form, when I look, let me get out of here. Let me go back in here, and I'll go into it. So you got the overview. Now, this week's form is worth 20 points, like it does every week. But what I wanted you to do, there's 4 links I'm going to show you. So when you go into the form, what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer the links right in the form. You're going to look at the links first. Make sure you review the links. After you review the links, so if I'm looking at links, so if I'm going to go in here, the links that I have for you, let me look in here real quickly. Just hang on a second. It's a little slow here. Here it is, chapter. Here it is. I click here. Prior to the links, you have one on behavioral targeting Generation Y. It's a quick YouTube, and when you go into there, it's how they're going to target Generation Y. There's one link that's going to go automatically to it. That's going to be talking about the behavioral targeting. But when you're in that YouTube selection, there'll be other. If you're once you're into advertising age, there's a whole bunch of different other YouTubes about different articles, different kind of advertising. Take a look at some of the other ones and see if some of them will pertain to your business. That's how you learn. You basically learn this by looking at what somebody else did and say, hey, that's kind of a good idea. I think I could modify some of this and it'll work for me. The other one, the standardized behavioral targeting, is under YouTube. So you'll go in there, look at that, and remember, all these are going to be posted inside in a form, in the subject area. Tell them if I'm doing behavioral targeting, and you say, hey, I already did that, but you weren't the first one to post, go in there and put your comments in there so everyone else, you will build on in the forum, learning from each other, so how each other looks at the information differently. The next one is retailers to text message. Now, this one's pretty good. If you look at the younger generation, Generation Y again, or even even after Generation Y. So if I'm looking at the younger consumer, he or she doesn't read the emails. They text everything. So as a consumer, I understand this is how they communicate constantly. So when you look at this YouTube, take a look at this and say, hey, and how did they learn how the consumer market is basically utilizing a different media? They learned it through observation. So a lot of times when you're in the store, see what your consumers are doing. Talk to your consumers. Make sure part of consumer behavior is when you're doing your network and focus. Talk to the employees. You should have some kind of feedback so the employees could say, hey, most of my consumers are coming in here doing this. Did you think about this? They're changing their behavior. And all this information is secondary and sometimes primary information, but this information is what's going to make you understand the consumer. And then when you look at the alternative, when you look at the social media and everything else, the next chapter, how does the consumer, or behavior affect their decision making? And that's where you're going to come in there. Okay, so you're going to go into these sites. I may move this for you on here. I'm on the online now anyway, but I think I may change it. Okay, and then you have the one quiz. You've got that. You have my concept maps. Make sure you use my concept maps, and you should be okay. And I did learning objectives on here for you. Now, when I look at the learning objectives on here, I went in a little more detail. So the learning objectives are basically similar to what your concept maps are going to be. And if I look at chapter 14, types of information sought, 5 sources of information. Remember, some of the information we're looking at it. Now I'm going to go into some of the lectures. So make sure you look at the concept map, and these are the main items that you should pick out of the chapter's reading. Okay, yeah. Once you look at my full and detailed learning objectives, not just learning objectives 5, and I'll give you what the author and what I think you should pick out of it. Personal sources, independent sources, marketing sources, experimental sources. All these are different sources. How I, as a consumer, gain information. Now, the internet is a big one. They talk about driving information to consumers. Banner ads and everything else you see, pop-up, social media, and now how do consumers to firms? Off media, you have behavioral targeting, different search engines, and they'll talk about the SEOs, selective uh, uh, engine that's optimized to the best utilization, because it's tied up to the same sponsor that basically will work with your brand that you're talking about. Okay, so you have that. You have mobile searches. How do people do the mobile searches through the texting? How do I measure what's the cost benefit of external searches, and why should me as a marketer be concerned that remember, as a marketer, if I know how my consumer is basically moving within uh, the internet, or how he or she gets information, that's where we put those triggers, those little cookies, for lack of better words, nitbits of little bits of information, just to keep on bringing it back out of the memory that he or she has it, or reinforce the memory. Okay, now chapter 16 says just looking at different kind of what do you call it? Alternative decision making. You're going to look at cognitive rule. You got the disjunctive rule, elimination by aspects, compensatory. You're going to look at effective choice. You're looking at attitude and choice. You're looking at what do you call it, attribute choice. You're looking at different nature, measure. How do we evaluate the criteria? And if you're looking at direct, indirect, project techniques, perpetual mapping, all these seems complicated, but in real life it all just flows. We naturally do this without understanding it. But now that, remember, part of consumer behavior is we're taking that onion and we're peeling layers and layers. So every layer I understand what that layer does to stimulate the next layer or the previous layers. Is That's why it looks like it's so complex, which it is. But now I know, okay, here's where this person's thinking this one. Here's where they're going to social media. Here's how they may not make the decision, but maybe I could plant the seed here. Here's where I reinforce that information. And this is how you're going to do this chapter. Okay, so when you look at this chapter, you have your forum is worth, what do you call it, 20 points. You have your quizzes. I'm giving you a little bit more points. And the essays, you're doing better, is worth 30 15 points for each chapter, so you get 30 points. You have to look at some of the sites you got to preview prior to starting your forums, and you've got the concept maps. This week I give you full concept maps, so when you're looking at and reading it, it's the full-blown one. So it's a 2-page concept map. You can make it larger, print it out, and then when you're reading the chapter, taking the quizzes and looking at the quizzes to study, say, wow, there's a lot of information. I'm going to try at the end to start giving you a little bit more in-depth concept maps, so you can focus more on learning and taking this information and put it into your research topic that we'll be talking about in the forum. In this forum, remember, everything you learn for the 4 different websites, convey, take what you've learned out of chapter 15, how you search for information, looking at it from the perspective of a consumer, and also looking at it from the perspective of a marketer. How do I plant those seeds, or make sure that I have at the right timing in the right location when my consumers are looking for something? I could plant my advertising or reminder to purchase, or be motivated to look back into my site. Okay, so my name is Dr. George Mochocki. This week we have, this is week 8. We're almost done. About 4 or 5 more weeks. So you're doing very well. Most of you you already know the pattern, so I'm not going to go too much into everything else, but we'll be covering chapter 15 which is the search. And look, this is the same way you search it. So when you're looking at this, next time you search information, just think about, oh, I wonder if they know how I search and why these things just pop into my web and my search or browsers and everything else, because they understand how I make a decision. I generalize and I group certain individuals, certain types of like generations Y, they search differently than the baby boomers. I mean, it's general. Remember, the majority of individuals do that way. And then chapter 16. So my name is Dr. George Mochocki. This is Marketing 247, Consumer Behavior, in conjunction with Blackboard Course Management System. We're covering 2 chapters, chapters 15 and 16, and I'll see you in the forum, and have a nice day. I just got to find out where my button is to turn you off, and